This is the Skin Science Podcast. I'm Dr. Thomas Hitchcock, and here we'll investigate everything skin science and dissect it from a scientific perspective, analyze it from a medical perspective, critique it from a consumer perspective, and give insight from an industry perspective. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dr. Thomas Hitchcock, and with us today in the studio, we have Angela McDonald. How are you doing, Angela?
I'm great. Nice to see you, Thomas.
Yeah, you warm there? Nice and toasty?
I feel great. This is a summer weight jacket.
This is summer clothes.
It's a summer weight jacket.
And the reason
it's a professional setting.
The reason I'm really
should have dressed appropriately for it.
The reason
not tell your boss.
Okay, and scene. And the reason that I'm really harping on Angela as per usual is because today we're talking about hyperhidrosis, and it's all about sweating. I am a sweater. I don't have hyperhidrosis, but I do have excessive sweating. But before we dive into that, we have a few more guests. We have Dr. Brian Jones sitting with us today. How you doing, Brian?
Doing well. Should I say I'm cool or whatever?
Sure, why not?
Say, hot, cool. Okay.
I was saying before that I look at me, I'm hot, meaning like I'm turning red because I'm hot, I'm warm, I'm hot, and Angela, of course, took it that I was being arrogant. Wow. But anyway, in the peanut gallery, we have a few people here. One, you can see Seti here today, our producer, has her hands in this contraption that we're about to talk about. Yes. And then we have Dr. Jose Maldonado, and we have Alan directing today. How are you doing, guys?
Great.
All right. And how's it feeling so far?
I feel some vibration here so far, yeah.
Okay, we'll let you know in a second whether that's a good or a bad thing.
Yeah.
Just keep doing it.
Yeah,
All right. And then we have our special guest today is Dan Moyer from Simi Valley, California. And he graduated from Rutgers University with a bachelor degree in English, Arts, and Science. He's VP of Sales and Marketing at RA Fischer Medical Device Company. And they're the makers of the device that Seti has her hands in. We're going to talk about that today. RA Fischer recently launched this new FDA-cleared iontophoresis device, the first metal-free iontophoresis option for treating hyperhidrosis. His team revolutionized a half-century old technology, making it clinically proven solution safer, easier, and more effective and accessible for patients. Welcome, Dan. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. Apologies for the mouthful that was my bio right there.
That's nothing. That's nothing.
Yeah, no, basically just fancy way of saying over here we spread awareness for hyperhidrosis, excessive sweating, and then we're really advocates of iontophoresis as a solution. And we'll kind of go over, all the gizmos and gadgets and down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, and so everybody that is not familiar with the fancy word hyperhidrosis, you are probably familiar with what it means. It's excessive sweating. Hyper meaning excessive. Hydrosis is referring to producing sweat. And so it's a problem that most people don't have, but there are a significant number of people who do have it. I sweat a lot, but I don't have hyperhidrosis. I tend to sweat more when I'm nervous, as most people do. What do they call it? Flop sweat? Isn't that what flop sweat is?
Oh, I've never heard that part.
Somebody look up the definition of flop sweat. I believe it means nervous sweating.
Oh, okay.
So like, for instance,
I don't like LeBron or something flopping as towards the I didn't know. Okay, all right.
So that's different. There's also like gustatory sweating from when you eat something hot and you can sweat that way. But hyperhidrosis is a condition, and we'll talk about it in a second, but it's really when you sweat beyond control, when you're not nervous, it's just all the time. It typically affects most people, it can affect them differently. Some people it's axillary, other people's it's palmar, which is the palms of your hands. Some people it's on the soles of your feet. I think it contributes not just to sweating, but it can also contribute in its mild form to like body odor on the feet and under the arms. But in the severe cases, it is debilitating in the sense that you constantly having to change your clothes, your socks. Seti, I'll give you a chance in a second to talk about your experience because I did not know, but Seti actually seems to have hyperhidrosis. I did not diagnose her. I don't know if she's been diagnosed, but she mentions that she even like feels that the steering wheel slips, and that's a safety issue. Yes. So this really affects people's lives. So Seti, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been suffering from this condition for as long as I can remember, from a very young age. And as you said, when I drive, my like driving wheel slips in my hand.
Keep your hands in the
sorry.
pots.
Okay. Yes. Sorry about that.
I'm just kidding.
And and then if I get nervous, actually my hands, when I create a little like hole, it will make it look like a lake or something.
Oh, when you cup your hand.
Yes, when I cup my hand.
It'll
Yeah.
that's a lot of sweat.
So yeah, we're talking about some serious thing here.
Oh wow.
it's very bad.
Yeah, and so that's and we're gonna let, because Dan, I think this is probably what Dan eats and breathes on a daily basis, and so we'll let him do some demographic stuff and all that in a second. But a little anecdote is, I had a friend. I used to live in New York City, and I had a lot of friends that were in theater, as you can imagine, that we're trying to get on Broadway and stuff. And one of the guys that I knew who had a really nice singing voice, and he had hyperhidrosis, where it was making it to where he couldn't get jobs because he would sweat through the costumes, and his hands would constantly be dripping, literally dripping with sweat, especially under the lights of the theater and such. So he had surgery, and it basically semi-paralyzed his diaphragm, and that kind of messed with his ability to sing on the stage. I don't know where he is today. I think he ended up becoming a photographer and switching careers and such. But regardless, I've seen it firsthand where people have gone through extreme measures to fix this condition. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it can actually really hurt you other ways. I know that when he had it, it did work to reduce the sweat, but it made it to where it was the opposite problem, where he started getting cracked, dry skin because now he wasn't producing any sweat. And so this is one of those things where if we can have a solution for excessive sweating, especially hyperhidrosis, not everybody's going to experience the relief, but the people that deal with it on a daily basis, it's a lifesaver, life changer. So Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about your observations, since this is what you do?
Yeah. So unfortunately, we do hear those stories all the time from our treatment specialists and the patients that we work with over here. It's some of the times the small things, like Seti described, the steering wheel. I've heard that before. I'd even heard of having to get the steering wheel like re-leathered because they sweat through that, or they sweat through their laptop keyboard and they have to get a new laptop basically every year or two. And so it's the small things that can impact the way that we live, and we create little systems around those things so that we can get by. But then there's the bigger issues, mental health, anxiety. A lot of these things can stem from the physical symptoms of excessive sweating. Maybe it was when at a young age in school, playing that game of 7-Up in class. I don't know if you remember that. And someone touched your thumb and, oh, Danny's so sweaty, right? And you get labeled that sweaty kid, and the effect that can have. Yeah. We've worked with college students who were trying to figure out, well, what major should I have where it'll end in a career where I don't have to shake anyone's hands. Right. And you never want to hear people trying to figure out their long-term life goals around the symptoms because they don't think there is a solution. Last kind of anecdote I'll share is my favorite. I had worked with a teacher who, like Seti, had just struggled with this her entire life, had been told that, well, it's just something you'll have to live with. Oh, it's just like your relatives who have clammy hands, it is what it is. But she wore a fake cast for every parent-teacher meeting she ever had. So she always had an excuse as to why she didn't have to shake hands. And ultimately, it's really rewarding to be able to work with these patients, to help them finally find something when they thought they had run out of options. And it worked pretty quickly. Within the first 2 weeks, they can start to see a difference and start to build that confidence and hopefully open them up to so many other things that are just outside of just the physical symptoms and improvements, and, hopefully improve that quality of life. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where everybody can relate to that in probably some capacity, where there's some issue that you might have that affects your quality of life, and you might have gotten used to it. And trying to navigate around it. But once it's gone, you realize how much you might have been missing. So for instance, there's certain people that have colitis, and colitis is where, you end up having to go to the restroom multiple times a day, and you can't control it. And so you basically live your life about where's the nearest restroom, how much time will I have to get to the nearest restroom? So you have people that
basically become agoraphobic and such because they don't want to leave home because they know what happens when they leave home and their colitis kicks in. There's a lot of conditions similar to that where people, and acne is one of them, where people, they get acne and they don't know what to do. So they just decide, I'm just not going to be social. And so it ruins the lives of young people because they feel like I'm ugly, even though most people don't really see it as much as other young people who are mean.
Right.
But like,
They feel it,
you see it as far as like, you want to help that person maybe, but you don't see it as like something that they shouldn't come out. It's just part of who they are.
Right.
But that's not what you feel
Or
when
it's
you're the
something
person.
that they're dealing with
Personally.
right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Not always,
exactly.
but it is a period of time that they're going through that they're having to deal with that.
Right. And for somebody who has hyperhidrosis, it typically doesn't go away.
It doesn't go away.
And so for someone with acne that's transient, it's one thing. For a person who has acne that's a lifelong issue, some people, very rarely, but some people do, that's the same type of phenomenon where it's just like you give up and you either have to live with it or you don't, and you navigate based on that. And so let's talk about... before we get into the iontophoresis, because I do want to spend some time there because, frankly, I'm not even 100% sure why it works. I do know that it works because the FDA actually cleared it and actually reimburses this particular device and other devices like it. And so, typically they won't do that if there's not some degree of efficacy that's recorded, right, Brian?
Well, you're right that they need to show efficacy, but I think that's still a case the mode of action of this still isn't fully known, to your point.
It works, though.
It does work, yeah. So
well, maybe Dan knows. Maybe
I was going to ask Dan if he has more information.
Yeah, this is one of those things. Surprisingly, our company's been around since the 1950s. And that's how long iontophoresis has been around and has been FDA cleared. It's been a long time, but it's still one of those things where we're constantly trying to spread awareness because there's a lot of options now, which is good for hyperhidrosis patients. There are more solutions available to them today than ever before. And overall, our success rate here is about 98% with patients.
That's amazing.
So that is the best part, is that very few ever have to return it. Of course, we've got, return policies and money back guarantees. But to be able to see results quickly and then ultimately achieve the 100% dryness, not just like a half, 50% reduction in sweat, but fully getting back to a level that they never thought they'd be able to achieve. And we'll go over, how that works, why it's possible, and even some of the differences between our Fischer device and some of the other iontophoresis options that are available today.
Yeah, and so Seti, let's check in with Seti. How you doing?
Doing good.
Good?
I feel some tickles a little bit.
Tickles?
On my hand.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's, I think, to be expected.
I think it's working.
If your hair starts to stand up.
Itchiness and things like that. Yep, it's a good sign to let you know that it's working.
Okay, we'll check back in with you in a bit. So really quickly, before we get into the iontophoresis kind of nitty gritty, let's talk about other options, because you just mentioned there are other options, more options than there's been before. However, I am one of those people that wants to know, okay, the good and the bad, right? I want to know, great, it helps me to stop sweating, but what else is it doing that might be trading off for? And so one of the things that I'm always a little bit nervous about with antiperspirants is what is that doing to my body? And I know it's controversial, like the aluminums and such, but I've actually gotten to a place in my life where there are times I'll use like a clinical strength antiperspirant if I'm going to give a presentation or something, and I really just need to not worry about it. Because I remember when I gave my dissertation defense, after I was done, it was like drenched. I remember I was stuffing paper towels up there because it was so embarrassing. I was so nervous and drenched. That might mean I was just not prepared. I don't know. But regardless, I try not to use them. I actually bought T-shirts that actually soak up sweat, because I don't sweat hyperhidrosis levels. I sweat to where if I buy these special T-shirts, it's just enough to where I don't have to worry about it ruining my clothes or coming through. Wow. I've actually, stopped using those as much anymore because we're developing some biome care deodorants and stuff, and that are actually finding out that the bacteria might have some effect we don't know yet. But it looks like some of the change of the biome, whatever that is, seems to have some effect on sweating, and so we're identifying some of that. Regardless, antiperspirants, takes, guys. Brian, takes on antiperspirants?
Again, I think a lot of the issues there are probably generated by competitors or issues.
The safety issues.
Safety issues,
yeah.
Correct. And you bring up the aluminum, and they carry that over. But I think that's, again, being the toxicologist and looking at the data, again, I'm not
There's no substantiation.
I'm not terribly concerned about it.
Right. The only thing is there is some contact dermatitis that I've had and such.
Correct, yeah. And that's,
could be the perfume.
Or any other ingredient in there as well, and over time. So again, you're talking about an occlusive area in the axillary area. So again, it's certainly an area that can be, getting dermatitis quite easily. So,
right. What about you, Angela? Because Angela, not everybody knows, she had a health issue that is very close to the axillary region. So she was probably a little more sensitive about what she did.
Very sensitive to it. So the data can say whatever the data would like to say. But as a breast cancer survivor and someone who had breast cancer in my lymph nodes and had all my lymph nodes removed, I'm not using aluminum in deodorant. So I use an alternative. The good news is there's lots of alternatives on the market.
Right.
Maybe not quite as effective as those
sweating,
with aluminum for sweating. But certainly feels more comfortable when you've, fought cancer and know that there is some data. Well, you tell me. I think there is some data that links aluminum in.
I think there's very little, and it wasn't linked directly.
It wasn't linked directly.
And there's some questions about, with all studies in detail, and so everybody can tear up any study that they want and say this was missing or that was missing, and that therefore no longer relevant. But again, I'm not saying that it's absolutely not possible that may occur, but it's
just one of those. Yeah, it's one of those things where I would agree with you. Had I had that health issue, I would want to err on the side of caution.
Absolutely.
In life, you take risks regardless of what you do.
Right.
I mean, when you drink a soda with a lot of sugar in it, you take risks. It's like you
I
have
don't like to talk about that.
I know you don't.
No, I'm kidding.
But regardless, for underarms, they, Dan, do people use antiperspirants on their palms and feet, and are they useful there?
Not normally. There are usually the first step that patients will take, and ultimately a lot of insurance companies will require patients to have built up a history of having tried and failed other prescription options before they'll cover the iontophoresis treatments. But for palmar plantar patients, they'll typically start with like a topical solution, maybe a cream very similar to an antiperspirant where they're applying it daily. Sometimes there are wipes, but they're often chemical based. For example, one of the wipes for underarms has a very specific, guidelines. Don't get it in touch with your hands because you don't want to get it in your eyes. It can lead to blown pupil, which I've dealt with patients specifically. One student had got pulled out of their classroom because the teacher thought they were on drugs.
Oh, dilated pupil? Is it blown pupil mean dilated?
Imagine then how embarrassing that is, right, going from there. So as you had mentioned before, with some of the other solutions, there's always pros and cons, right? Whether it's cost point, what's covered by insurance, how many times does it have to be applied, and how often does it need to be refilled? So at the end of the day, we talk to patients about these things because there are different elements that are more important to certain patients and help them find something, that's the best situation for them.
I just had never heard the term blown pupils, so I guess that means dilated pupils.
Yeah, blown pupil, dilate, you got the big black saucer eyes.
Okay, I hadn't heard that term before.
Have been dealing in the drug world lately.
That's my way of saying that I'm probably not a druggie.
There actually was
probably.
There was some work that was done actually by the military looking at
for sweating on the hands?
Sweating on the hands and the feet. And again, this goes back about 30 years ago because I remember we were looking into that for a particular product line. And so the answer is yes. That's the first treatment is towards applying antiperspirant,
topical antiperspirant of some sort
to the feet and to the hands.
Is it typical to be using aluminum?
Of course, they're going to use what works in the military, so they're not going to think about safety at all. So
of course not.
So again, but typically they're looking at formulations and they contain aluminum.
Okay. I didn't think about it because I've never had that issue. Interestingly, though, I do know that the amount of sweat that comes out of your fingertips is pretty high, even in normative individuals. And I know that because there was actually somebody that was developing little electrodes that you can put on your fingers, and they use the sweat to create energy. So basically, just by sweating, you could charge your cell phone. I thought that was amazing. Now, I guess we would stick everybody's cell phones onto SETI because we could charge everybody's cell phones.
Yes, I guarantee.
But regardless, I just thought that was interesting, the amount of sweat that comes out naturally, and then just think about how for people that do it excessively, it's even more of an issue. But let's talk about another one. Let's see. here we have Botox. And so Botox is one that I know works for the axilla. The issue is it can be a little pricey. For somebody who's affluent, it's probably worth it. It's a lot of injections, but question is, just like you see with any type of antigen, do you develop immune resistance to it because you're putting relatively large amounts for axillary hyperhidrosis? So would it stop working, in a couple of years or so?
I think you could build up tolerance to it. Yes, correct. And so, but yeah, you're right. They also do it on the hands, but yes, it's painful.
That would hurt. Yeah,
it's painful, but and the number of injections is quite large.
I've actually seen those treatments done too. I got the opportunity to attend a hyperhidrosis masterclass at George Washington University a few years ago. And they had a batch of patients in to do the Botox for palmar. And it was incredible to see it's about 50 little dots that they put in the hand. And then as they sit there and the doctor injects and the nurse has an ice roller going over each section one at a time. I can't tell you how many patients we've worked with where they went, I tried that one time, never again. What are my other options?
Yeah, I imagine. I know that there's some companies working on like topical toxins and stuff. Regardless, though, until we have that stuff, I don't know if I would get it. Botox in my palms or my feet, because those are very sensitive areas. So the other ones are, let's see. I do know it works, though. That's the thing, it works.
Yeah. But again, I think, as Dan mentioned, it's very transient. It also benefits, 3 to 6 months, and then next we do it again. So if it's that painful, then...
And that painful, and then it stops working. I just don't know. If, I would rather probably find a better alternative. And that's why this iontophoresis is, if it works at 90, you said 98%?
That's right.
So I can't imagine why. I mean, maybe we need to get that promoted a little bit, because if it really does that high, I know that it's probably a little bit of a hassle, at least at first, to get doing it every day. And then what's the follow-up like after you get it working? Is it every week? Is it every month? What is the typical?
Yeah, so we walk patients through our 3-phased approach. The first phase is about the first 2 weeks, and they're treating every other day. But once they're 100% dry by week 2, 3, they'll begin to reduce frequency on a week-to-week basis until they reach phase 3, which is the maintenance phase, and they're on an as-needed basis. And that can really range for patients according to the severity of the symptoms, body chemistry, even down to the mineral density of the tap water that they're using.
Okay.
But it's pretty regular for patients to go 4 to 6 weeks sometimes in between having to sit down and just treat for 20 minutes.
Right, and you have to use tap water, right? Because you need the electrolytes or something like that. You can't use like...
That's right, yeah. You need tap water, nothing filtered or softened, because it's calcium, magnesium, and potassium, and some of those natural minerals that are being used to basically plug up the sweat pores.
Oh, so it is another metal idea. There's something... Okay, let's get through the other list, and then we'll talk about the how it works. So let's see, where did I leave off? Okay, transdermal patches. Okay, so I know that there's one that was recently cleared, and Jose was looking into it. Maybe, Jose, could you really quickly tell people what you know about those patches that were just cleared?
So it's a patch for underarm hyperhidrosis, and the way it works is that once your sweat mixes with the metal in the patch, it creates a reaction that releases heat. That heat damages that sweat gland and thus stopping the sweat.
Yeah.
That's pretty much how it works. Recently FDA-cleared by I can't remember the company right now, but it doesn't matter.
I think it's a relatively new company. It's a small company. They're just getting going. I think they're selling in physician dispensed. But there was also another company. This is in a patch, but there was another company called Miradry. Is Miradry still around?
I believe so.
I think they are. So they basically use microwave. So you're literally cooking your axilla. Wow. I'm not sure. I think it works, but I think there's a pretty big trade-off. I think you basically are going to have some scar tissue formation, and I've not known somebody who's done it personally, because I don't know if I would ever recommend that. But I think it works. I just don't know if the trade-off is worthwhile. And I think you have to get multiple treatments as well, but I could be wrong there.
Well, I think it speaks to what a concern hyperhidrosis is, right?
Oh, yeah.
For these companies
yeah.
to spend the level at what they're spending in R&D to be able to bring products like what you've mentioned to market. It's not a problem that is not it's a concern.
I agree, but then this is where this device that he's sent us really intrigues me, because it's been around for, you said, what, 50 years plus, or just the company? Yep. No, the company's been around for 70, 80 years, right?
Yeah, so this will be our 75th year in business. Started in 1948, but yeah, it was in the early 1950s that were named after the doctor that pioneered iontophoresis, actually, for the treatment of hyperhidrosis, originally way back then.
And that was the around the time that it was invented?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's been around for a while, and I think the thing that I'm kind of seeing cursory from our discussion is that what's probably made that not become more mainstream is the convenience factor, because people are always trying to find something that's a one and done. But the problem is, I think that what people don't realize is the trade-off, because like you can cook your tissue and have no more sweat glands, but is that really a good trade-off?
Right.
You know, it's like the lasers that are ablating the sebaceous glands. Is that really the best trade-off for reducing sebum when you might need it?
Right. Well, the same thing is with Accutane in individuals later on having atopic dermatitis.
Yep.
From that later on in life, and then also just normal dry skin. So
well, that's the same with my friend that got the surgery. Is that it did work, but that was the opposite problem.
Right.
You know, and so that's where. So you're done with your treatment, Seti?
Yes.
Okay. So how was it? Describe. It was 30 minutes.
I think it was 20 minutes.
20 minutes? Is
Yes.
that
20 minutes, yeah.
20 minutes? All right,
Yes.
so 20 minutes, was it tolerable? Was it comfortable? Tell from a person that's interested in this when they're listening to this podcast, what would you say as somebody who suffers from it and has tried everything? Is this something that you're going to try? Is it something you think is worthwhile?
Right. This is first time I'm using it, and I felt a little bit of tickle throughout the 20 minutes.
Well, you're being electrocuted. I'm just kidding.
Yes.
No, there's electricity in there, so you should probably feel something.
Yeah. So I felt like it's working. So I gotta obviously do it multiple times to see how
It works, whether it works.
But hopefully it's gonna save my life, because I've been suffering from this in so many different scenes of life.
So
Yeah.
what he just said about you doing it every day for, what was it, 2 weeks, Dan?
Every other day for the first 2 weeks.
Okay, every other day for the first 2 weeks, and then what was it again? Say the next part, phase 2.
And then you'll gradually reduce one session from your schedule each week on a week-to-week basis. It's a little bit of a game of guess and check, because everyone's body is different, but go every other week, every 3 weeks, once a month, and then when you start to feel the clamminess start to come back a little bit, you know you've stretched it too long, and you simply resume that previous treatment schedule.
Cadence. Okay, and when should she feel the effect kick in at first?
Anytime. Again, for some patients, it's after just the first couple of uses that they really already see a difference. Other patients, it can be that full 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks. But hopefully within there, as long as she's using it on the proper settings, and our treatment specialists always are available to walk patients through it. In fact, a lot of them give us a call and will put us on speakerphone and want someone to walk them through setting it up and review the treatment plan with them. That way they're fully confident getting started.
Okay. Well, so Seti, do you think that's something you could follow?
Absolutely. I will definitely follow that. I had a couple of questions.
Sure, go ahead.
And when I'm putting my hands for 20 minutes, sometimes it gets too tickly. Is that okay if I take off my hands for a little bit and rest it and then go back again? Or should I
absolutely. So with the device, there's an anti-shock guard. So interestingly enough, with other iontophoresis devices, because you're completing a circuit, if you remove your hands prior to the treatment ending, you can feel a little zap type of sensation.
Oh, no.
But with our device, the anti-shock guard, it kicks off the current. You can safely remove your hands. The timer will pause, and then you simply place your hands back in after you've fielded your phone call, answered the door, whatever it was.
Right.
I see.
All right, so you think that's definitely doable?
Yes.
It's worth it.
Absolutely.
All right.
I'm gonna do this and review it.
So so we asked Seti what if she can. Right now, she has the small pads, and Dan said he's going to send her the appropriate pads for the palmar and plantar.
That's right.
Are you going to do both or just the palms?
I'll do both.
She's going to do both, so she has both. And so she's going to do it. She's going to document her journey. And then when we actually put out the podcast, probably in this section, we'll have a little montage of her like saying, you know, this is day number 1. You know, my hands have been charred from the. No, I'm just kidding. So
I can't feel a thing.
But then we'll put that right here. All right. So, so she'll do that, and then we'll be able to kind of make an assessment about, you know, what her journey was like. Was it worth it? Did it work? How much does she sweat less, or you know, whatnot? And so that's. I'm kind of excited to see how this goes. It's kind of serendipitous because I didn't know she had this issue until today. I was actually going to do it on myself, and I don't really have the issue, so it's great that we have somebody that actually can use it and actually get some great value from it.
Update. 2 months later.
So I've been using the device Fischer for past 2 months, almost 15 times, and I usually treat myself with the level of 2 or sometimes 3. And I see some progress. My hands are sweating definitely less. I used to sweat all the time, but as you can see, not as much. I still sweat, but not as much. So far, it's, let's say, about 30% less right now. So I'm gonna keep using it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this. I'm looking
Well,
forward
thank Dan.
to
He
shake
sent
hand.
it.
Thank you.
Of course. To your earlier point, hyperhidrosis is surprisingly common. It's something that is not often talked about, and maybe it's because it comes from like a place of embarrassment sometimes too. But everyone knows that person who had clammy hands, or you know, would leave footprints, or only wore black maybe to prevent, you know, the underarm stains. Yeah. You know, maybe not so serendipitous that you knew someone, because in all likelihood, we all probably know 1 or 2 people that have this.
Well, I guess it was serendipity that she happened to be in the studio the day of this podcast.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So what is the prevalence, Dan? What are the statistics showing in terms of the population? What percentage have hyperhidrosis?
Yeah, I think the last time the International Hyperhidrosis Society did a study, it was roughly 7% of like the global population that suffers from excessive sweating in one form or another. And while we mainly deal with patients with palmar, plantar, and axillary, hyperhidrosis affects the whole body. And there are third-party attachments from other companies that, in fact, can integrate with our device to treat craniofacial, the scalp, neck, other areas. I've even once dealt with a patient that hyperhidrosis that only affected a specific like 8-inch area of their forearm.
Oh, that's weird.
So with this condition, it is very unique.
That is weird. I didn't know that it was that specific for some people, but that's very interesting. It's a pretty high prevalence for something like this, 7%.
And more prevalent in any particular population, any particular demographic, ethnic group, or just globally 7% across all ethnicities?
Yeah, from what we can see, it's globally 7% across the board. And for most patients, the symptoms will typically start to present themselves or worsen around puberty, which can then be difficult to discern because obviously there's already a lot going on, right? And starting to sweat more is somewhat natural as part of that process. But it's when you said the sweat starts to impact daily activities, the quality of life. But some patients are born with this. We've dealt with parents who are looking for a solution for a 3-year-old because they slipped on the basement floor because they always have sweaty feet and they hit their head. And you know, so even one of the older patients I've worked with, it's very common for parents to call us in, but this parent was 80 years old looking for a solution for her 60-year-old son who had just gone his whole life and was still looking for help. So really, we deal with patients of all ages and backgrounds.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful when we can find something that has a high degree of efficacy and a low degree of safety issues. You don't find much in medicine that has a 98% chance of success. Isn't even Botox 98%? Which is one of the higher effective.
Hyperhidrosis in particular?
Just for it working for anything. Yeah. It's pretty prevalent that it works. Well, it's, most medicines don't have that high of an efficacy.
Well, I think looking for hyperhidrosis is towards Botox working?
I just meant in general.
Well, again, I think it depends on what you're trying to do. And
okay, that's too far down the rabbit hole.
It gets all sorts of complications as towards treatment and what treatment you're using for.
Yeah, so the other ones here, did you?
And I think I'm kind of enlightened because I thought you were going to say, Dan, well, this is something you have to do daily from now on to be able to get the effects. So really for 2 weeks, every other day, and then, back off from there and get to a point where you're just doing it as needed.
Like a month at a time.
I was really surprised to hear that, quite honestly.
For sure. And a lot of that has come because of some of the technical changes with advancements in the technology from really about for 50 years, iontophoresis hadn't evolved a lot and had just stayed the same, very stagnant. And so hopefully, get more patients accessible to it when they realize they don't have to do it as often as they thought they did.
So there's a couple more on this list here about treatments that people are trying. We have RF microneedling laser phototherapy. So the RF microneedling is one that's interesting to me. Jose, where did you see that? Was that something that they did a study, or is it just something that people are doing?
I think I did see one study, but it's one thing people are doing. Once again, you're just adding heat to destroy that sweat gland. Okay,
so let me give you an anecdote here. When I was at Ulthera, they published a paper because one of the physicians did an IIT on this, and he claimed it was a little, in my opinion, it was a bit ridiculous that they had like a 70% or 80% reduction of sweat, and then the placebo had 0% reduction. And as a scientist, that screams craziness to me, because you're always going to have a placebo effect, and especially with something that's related to emotions like sweating. And we did the study ourselves, and it didn't do anything. And so one of the reasons why I was kind of trying to call, not bluff, but I was trying to basically say, can you explain to me how this works? Is because how do you target the sweat gland to ablate it? Now, if you use the patches, because the patches go through the sweat and then they ablate, the metal actually ablates where it goes, I get it. If you're going to completely cook the whole tissue, like with a microwave, with the microwave device, not a microwave, then I get it. I don't understand how, when you're doing something like RF microneedling, where the needles have to find the sweat gland to work, how does that actually function, and how effective is that really going to be? Because those needles are not only working on sweat glands, they're going to cook the tissue around it. And so sweat glands are not everywhere, there. So I find a little bit of skepticism around anything like that is agnostic to tissue. Things like with the aluminum that cooks, I understand how that works, because it's actually finding the sweat gland and working. Anybody have any different opinion on that?
I don't know the data actually for that patch. So again,
I don't know if it works either, but FDA cleared it, so I imagine it works a little bit.
Probably. Well, I mean, it has to be 50% or more. I think I think that's their minimum requirement
for the device.
For the device. So again.
Yeah, and so I don't know how much it works or how good it works, but I've never tested it. I don't see any data. I don't know any data either. But laser and phototherapy, how's that, Jose? How's that working?
So I couldn't find any papers for phototherapy. I think it's one of the things people are just trying anything, or there's some marketing gimmick.
So that was on a list somewhere.
Yeah, that was on a list somewhere of like.
So again, people are desperate,
so
they're trying stuff. Okay, yeah. Understand? Because I don't know how a laser would treat sweat.
And it may be a deal where their Botox and Miradry and other products in that same market are working, and so they're looking for opportunities. And with RF, it almost sounds like, so in your mind, that's more of a hit or miss potential opportunity, Thomas. Not a slam dunk, but more of a you might get lucky and hit a little something somewhere, but not an overall effect.
Yeah, but is that actually for this particular cases, or is it for individuals that actually have nodules that are formed regarding sweat and?
Are you talking about like the inflammatory issues?
Correct.
Oh, maybe, but that's a completely different thing,
right,
So
yeah, I didn't know. I'm wondering whether or not that's really where
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. What I would say though is I don't see how it would work for hyperhidrosis, and I wouldn't see how it would work on the palm, especially, or the sole of the foot. But let's talk a little bit about. We already touched on this a few times, but the iontophoresis, the mechanism of action. There's not a lot known, right? Other than what you said, which was the first thing that caught my attention, because I didn't know that was the case. But you said it's the metals in the water that actually are getting into the pores to stop the sweating. Do you know how that happens? Is it through a thermal ablation thing? What is it that she's feeling? She's feeling the tingles, like pins and needles. Is it on the palm only, or was it everywhere that the water was touching? What was it?
It was everywhere that water is touching, actually.
Okay.
And I kind of felt it going through
up your arms?
Yeah, arms.
Okay. Is that typical, Dan?
Yeah, and so what's actually happening is iontophoresis is really a delivery mechanism. Okay. So the main control unit is introducing a mild electrical current into that tap water that's then delivering those natural minerals like calcium and magnesium into the sweat pores. So when patients ask us, kind of describe it, we liken it to a sponge. You've got all these holes where there's sweat seeping out of all the time, and the current just pushes those minerals into those holes to, plug them up. There's no damage being done to the sweat glands or anything like that. It's just creating this all-natural dryness barrier.
So wouldn't that be the same as how antiperspirants work? Because basically they go in, they swell and plug up the sweat glands, right?
Right. Well, I guess I'm kind of
similarly, except there's no with our device, there's no metal electrode being used anymore. There's no metal ions being released into the water. Previously, patients with metal allergies or extreme skin sensitivities could not use iontophoresis device for that reason. But now that we've adapted to the silicon graphite electrodes, patients are now kind of opened up to that as a possibility.
Wouldn't it be is it going to be dependent on the water source then? Are some people going to have better response than others because some have more minerals than others?
Correct. Yeah. So if you live in a harder water area, that's advantageous to you. If you live in a softer water area, there's always workarounds that we can recommend to help balance the pH levels. Sometimes it's as simple as adding baking soda to the trays prior to treatment, and that helps patients. And sometimes patients who aren't seeing results after the first 2 weeks, when we connect with them, turns out they were just using a Brita filter water source, which is literally filtering out all of the necessary minerals for the treatment. But for most patients we work with, again, because of the high success rate, regardless of their water source, the treatment does work. Might just impact how frequently you're using the device long term, even the levels that you're treating at, and some of those variables.
Okay, so maybe at some point you guys can think about making little electrolyte packets that they can put into the dish so that they can get the right balance or whatnot. But in the meantime, 98% is hard to beat. Even if you have to do it a couple more times a month or something, I think that if it works, that's pretty special. I mean, all the stuff we've talked about today, the stuff that works, there's maybe 1, 2. I would probably use an antiperspirant. I would probably do Botox. I probably would not cook my underarm with microwave. I'm not sure I would use the patches yet. I need to see a little more data on that. I would not do microneedling with radio frequency just because I don't think it would work. I mean, I might try it because I don't think it would hurt. I just don't. It seems like if you paid a lot of money for that, it'd probably be a waste of money.
Yeah, and I don't know that I'll be honest. I don't know that I'd even try Botox. That didn't sound like something I'd be interested in signing up for. That many pricks, and I don't know. But I've not suffered from this problem, so I don't know the extent of where people go to try to resolve this issue. So.
Yeah, we were just talking about fecal transplants in the clinic yesterday because we're doing some research, and fecal transplants are, when you talk about it, it's kind of a gross concept, right? But for people that have colitis and stuff that might be, they're thinking they might be able to heal themselves, or C. diff, or somebody that could possibly die from these diseases, to them, they're willing to try something. And so not that this is nowhere near what we're talking about here today, because there's nothing really gross that we're talking about, but with botulism and stuff, or botulinum toxin, not the same. I would say I could feel why somebody, especially with your history, may not be so apt to want to put something near those tissues.
Right.
Right.
So I mean, when there's other options, it's easy to choose.
Yeah.
Differently.
So Dan, are you? So is this known? This is the way that it works that you just described to us? Because that's great if it is.
I guess that's where I was going to go with questions. Have they done things like radio label studies or stuff like that as far as looking at? You didn't necessarily
radio label. Why would you put?
Again, you're tracing it.
I know, but why would you want to put radioactive?
Because that way you could. Well, I wouldn't say necessarily do it on a human, but again, looking to see, or even on a tissue model, is sort of seeing the
understood whether it goes in there
and where it goes and how it stays and how long it stays.
I doubt anybody. It's a 80-year-old technology. I doubt too many people back. It's worked. Dan, do you know when we started to see the data that it works at such a high level? Was it early on?
Yeah, really earlier case studies. We have case studies that are published using our device from back in the 80s. There's going to be a new one that's just being published right now on the newer device. But yeah, there's been case studies published over decades on this, and usually they're using our MD2 or MD1, one of our legacy metal-based units, because for a long time, RA Fischer was the sole provider of the iontophoresis device, which is probably another reason why there wasn't, so much prevalent awareness of it, because there was only one company doing it for a long time.
No, I knew about it. I just didn't know how it worked. And so, at the end of the day, if it works, it works. Any safety issues, Dan?
No, and to be honest, that's why a lot of patients come to us, is because of how safe this treatment is. And there's no chemicals being introduced into the body. There's nothing invasive. So we do talk to a lot of parents about this as an option for younger patients. And as long as they have the patience to sit there for 20 minutes every other day over the first couple of weeks, that's really the key. And the only side effects that someone might expect at first is some maybe light redness, or as said, he experienced some light itchiness during the first couple of treatments, but that subsides as the body gets acclimated to it. So in the long term, especially for palmar plantar patients that can now treat both hands and both feet at the same time, so it's just 20 minutes instead of what was previously 40 to 60, they're just popping on their favorite show, on Netflix, and it's over before they know it.
Yep.
Is there any concern regarding pacemakers or pumps or anything like that?
Yeah, so pacemakers is actually one of the only contraindications for iontophoresis. Pacemaker, copper IUD, and the existence of currently being pregnant. But it is okay to use iontophoresis for new moms who are breastfeeding, again, because of no chemicals going into the body. We've worked with a ton of patients who, once they learned that pregnancy was a contraindication, they said, okay, well, I'm going to call you back in 8 months. And they're super excited once they're able to get back and find the solution again.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I'm learning a lot about this device, but, I knew a lot about hyperhidrosis because I had worked clinically in it before, but I didn't know much about the iontophoresis. And I think actually I'm glad that you contacted us, Dan, because I think more people need to know about this, because it's not super cheap, meaning most people probably don't want to drop a lot of money because as a consumer, we're all skeptical, right? Does it really work? But if it's reimbursable through the government and stuff, I think most people would try it. But if they knew it worked, like if they had a guarantee, it's just there's just so many shysters out there that are selling us everything. So it's one of those things where hopefully this and SETI's experience will allow people to have a little more confidence. Now, people can, if they want to, is it like $400? Is that what I remember hearing?
So first, we actually do work with a number of insurance companies.
Okay.
And you had mentioned the military before. TRICARE is one of our biggest partners. We work with the VAs all across the country. In fact, we have a couple of stories from snipers. Snipers are definitely one person you don't want with sweaty hands in the most stressful of moments. Oh, no. So very unique case studies there. But we work with insurance companies. For patients who are going out of pocket, it's bundled according to what areas they're treating. So that way they get exactly the components they need, nothing more, nothing less. For underarms only, starts at $750 to the 3-in-1, which treats all areas. It's $1,075. And then we have 60-day money-back guarantee on all of the equipment. It's a 5-year warranty. So if anything happens, if they're not totally satisfied with the results, insurance reimbursement didn't work out for some reason, they can simply send it back to us in Southern California. Yep. It's fully refundable and a really easy process. But luckily, this works out for most patients who are referred to us. And they're especially glad when our insurance department can file the prior authorizations and the claims on their behalf, and really they can just sit back and wait for the approvals to come in and get the device at relatively no cost to them.
This is very interesting. Yeah, it's a bit expensive for most people, but I'd say if they know it works, then I think people would more than be willing to invest in this, especially since it's not a one-time use thing. You can use it many times, and I'm assuming that they probably have some pads or something that you can replace eventually when you need to. there's
only if you wanted to. So that's another benefit and why patients look at something like an iontophoresis device. Not only are you self-sufficient with it, but with ours, now that the metal is gone and there's no more corrosive components, there's no more ongoing maintenance or replacement costs. Well, so unless the dog chews them up or something like that with the blue foam, technically the shelf life of them is 18 months. But as long as you wring them out to dry, patients keep them for much longer. And so a lot of times patients, at first, if their insurance doesn't cover it and they're looking at the out-of-pocket cost and kind of weighing the risks, once they tally up a lot of the expenses, whether it's new laptops, steering wheel covers, right? Like these different things that they were accruing, it pays for itself. And at the end of the day, we even have a monthly payment plan for those patients with nothing due up front. So if they're really hesitant, we'll send you the device. You don't owe anything day one, and you'll literally see results before your first payment's even due on it.
Wow, you're doing a very good job as VP of Sales and Marketing, Dan. No, but we will be following Seti and her journey on this, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Based on what we said today, I'm excited for you, and I might be having to come borrow that when I have events or something. But Dan, thanks so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for sharing the device as well as your experience and the knowledge. I think we learned something today.
Absolutely. Very, very interesting.
So Dan,
of course,
where could they find you if they want to find more information about you or your company?
Yeah, sure. So you start with our website. It's rafischer.com, and that's Fischer, that's spelled Fischer. And then on social media, we're just RA Fischer Co. across TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. We've got a lot of great tutorial content out there to really show people how easy and safe it is. We've also got a lot of great just customer testimonials on third-party sites out there. So we always encourage people to do their research, look at what's out there, and I think they'll come to the conclusion, like a lot of people do, that iontophoresis is the safest, easiest, and most effective treatment right now.
All right. Thank you.
Very nice.
And so, Angela, where can they find you if they want to talk to you?
I am incredibly active on Instagram at Angela Wilson McDonald. So try not to get overwhelmed by my content.
By the one
can
post
get
per year.
A little heavy, but I like to keep it light.
All right. Jose, Seti, Alan, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram.
Do we want to find you on Instagram? That's the question.
I'm also very active, like Angela. Once.
That's why he's laughing.
Yeah. What is my Instagram handle? I don't know it.
Okay, you lost your turn. Seti, where do you go?
Okay. So you can find me in Instagram as well, SETY_GUCHI, Seti Gucci.
Okay, and Alan?
My website is makingfilms.com. And my Instagram is Alin, ALIN.Bijan, BIJANB as boy.
Yeah, and don't forget, Alan is a Emmy Award-winning filmmaker, and so check out some of his stuff. I'm Dr. Thomas Hitchcock. You can find me at dr.t.hitchcock on Instagram or at crownlaboratories.com. It was a wonderful conversation today. We hope you learned something. Thank you for your eyes and ears, and until next time, goodbye for now.